Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4, playing some World of Warships Legends. Today I wanted to give you all a look at another premium ship. This time it's the Tier 7 Premium Global XP German cruiser, Prinz Eugen. First we're going to look at some history of the ship, then we'll get my impression on how she performs in the game, talk about commander options, run down the stats, and finally finish off with some gameplay. If you'd like to skip to any part of this review, there is an index down in the description. The Prinz Eugen was the third and final Hipper-class heavy cruiser constructed by Germany. Laid down in April 1936, launched in August 1938, and commissioned into service of August of 1940, she enjoyed the most successful service history and the least embarrassing end of any of her sister ships. Prinz Eugen was obviously named after a person, one Prinz Eugen of Savoy-Cariano. Prinz Eugen, the historical figure, was a field marshal in the Holy Roman Empire, which, in spite of its name, was more of a patchwork of competing, smaller states dominated by Germans and Austrians. Born in Paris and dying in Vienna, and prince of what is essentially portions of southeastern France and northern Italy, explaining exactly how Germany would come to name a ship after him could take 15 minutes by itself. Needless to say, as a member of the Habsburg royal family, successful general in several wars, and statesman, Prinz Eugen has been claimed by more than a couple of countries. In fact, the Austrians, British, and Italians built ships in his honor, including the Italian Condottieri-class cruiser Eugenio de Savoia, which also saw combat during World War II. The Prinz Eugen's first operational mission was as escort to the Bismarck. She was present at the Battle of the Denmark Strait. In the lead-up to the action many of you are already familiar with, Prinz Eugen, following Bismarck, attempted to engage HMS Norfolk and Suffolk, a pair of County-class Royal Navy heavy cruisers, and successfully drove them off. In the action, though, Bismarck managed to damage her own radar, so Prinz Eugen swapped places with her, taking the lead of the formation. This would have some effect on the more infamous portion of the battle, which would occur the next day. And that was, of course, the showdown between HMS Hood and Prince of Wales versus Bismarck and Prinz Eugen. Early in the battle, Prinz Eugen did score several hits on Hood, but obviously the battle came to a rather abrupt and devastating conclusion when Bismarck landed a hit on Hood, leading to the detonation of the ship's magazines. Due to the damage caused by Hood and Prince of Wales to Bismarck, the two ships would separate, with Bismarck heading for port in France for repair, and Prinz Eugen distracting the Prince of Wales long enough to allow for that to happen. Prinz Eugen was making its way into the Atlantic to commence commerce raiding when a short 3 days later the Bismarck was sunk. Realizing that perhaps committing their relatively limited supply of surface ships to unsupported raiding in the Atlantic wasn't a great idea, what with Britain in the way, but also considering the massive fleet of submarines they were putting together for that task anyway. Returning to base in France alongside Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, she was damaged by RAF attacks and spent the remainder of the year undergoing repairs. All three ships would make the Channel Dash in February 1942, supported by a half-dozen destroyers and a ton of torpedo boats. Leaving Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in Germany for repairs, the Prinz Eugen made it through the channel unscathed and joined the Deutschland-class pocket battleship Admiral Scheer in Norway. Once she got there, the constant British harassment paid off when she was struck by a torpedo launched by HMS Trident, a British submarine, and thus had to turn right back around to Germany for repair. After her repair, the remainder of her operational life was spent deployed to the Baltic Sea to provide fire support for the retreating German army. Though airstrikes against her would continue for the remainder of this time, she was one of the few major ships in the Kriegsmarine to survive the war, and the only member of her class to do so. Hipper, of course, was scuttled in port, though she was functionally unusable at that point anyway. The Blücher had suffered a blue burr only 3 days into her service life when she strayed a bit too close to an obsolete Norwegian coastal defense gun commanded by a retiree who apparently hadn't been informed of his own obsolescence. Following the war, Prinz Eugen was awarded to the United States as a war prize, and she would have a very brief career, actually, as USS Prinz Eugen, since her power plant had been sabotaged by the disembarking German crew, and the Americans had more than a few extra ships lying around following World War II. Prinz Eugen was towed to the Bikini Atoll to serve as a test ship for atomic weapons. She functionally survived 2 blasts inside of a half a mile, but she did start to take on a small amount of water following the second hit caused by an atomic bomb. This flooding would eventually cause her to roll over 5 months later. The United States has denied salvage rights to the ship ever since, though 72 years after her sinking, she did briefly become the cause for some naval interest when oil started to leak from the wreck. This prompted the US Navy and Micronesia to work to nearly completely drain around 250,000 gallons of fuel from the wrecked ship, or a little bit shy of 1 million liters for anybody who doesn't use the totally sensible and well-organized imperial measurement system. So the Prinz Eugen in the game. I posted a video on the Hipper actually just a few days ago talking about why I love the Hipper, and if you are considering purchasing this ship, I hope you're familiar with that ship, because otherwise, kind of taking a leap of faith that doesn't have to be a leap of faith. So usually what I do with these ships that I really like is to make sure that I tell you why you shouldn't purchase it, and let you work out whether or not you think the strengths of the ship override any concerns that maybe I brought up, or that you noticed throughout this video, or maybe other videos that you've watched. So here's that list. And by and large, I think this comes down to, do you have 750,000 global XP? If you think this is the very best thing you can spend that global XP on, and if you really like the playstyle of the Hipper. A lot of people don't. In fact, I think she usually ranks towards the bottom of the list in terms of people's preferences. If you are one of those people who think that, the Prinz Eugen is probably not going to change your mind, because she plays very similarly. With slower but longer range torpedoes, she offers a little more of a threat at medium range than maybe her sister ship. If, like the Hipper, you look at the Prinz Eugen and think trading out multiple high-powered acoustic search consumables isn't worth one or more reload boosters, well, then you have to think whether you want to spend a lot of your resources on a ship that you functionally already may own and may actually have permanent camo for already. The advantages would be admittedly pretty thin. You make slightly more money, or you lose slightly less money, in the Prinz Eugen because it's a premium ship. You've got a little extra range on your torpedoes, and of course, you're one of the best dressed ships in town. Seriously, this ship is very sharp in its camo. If you look at the ship and you think it's the Jean Bart to everyone else's Richelieu because it's got a reload consumable, and the premium ship has got to be just that much better than the standard ship, well, I would tell you Prinz Eugen is a better ship than the Hipper right now, but only just barely. And if you want the Prinz Eugen because you love the idea of reload boosters, you should probably think about how you want to use it. If you think this is going to help you play better at range, floating around the Jean Barriere, then the ship is probably not for you. The Hipper is very much a brawling man's cruiser, and it prefers aggressive gameplay. By the time that enemy ships start to get within 8 kilometers, your pulse really ought to start to quicken in this ship. This is your opportunity. You hear the horns signaling charge, and you think the reload booster is going to help me really punish everyone out there, in addition to my already excellent torpedoes. That's really why I love playing the Hipper, and that's why I have loved playing Prinz Eugen. Playing the ship well is relatively hard to do, but being difficult is also what makes it very satisfying. Doing well in this ship often feels like robbing a bank. Not that I know anything about that. The fact that the Hipper has a reputation for not being a dangerous ship aside, it is the kind of ship that is often ignored, and honestly, usually because it's the right thing to do at the time. But when you can slip in close, you can show people that they have ignored you at their own peril. It is hard because, unlike some other ships, it doesn't bounce everything off of its bow, and though it does have a turtleback, it is actually pretty easy to delete this ship from range. or by pretty much any ship with 16-inch guns, no matter where they are. So this time with the replay, I'm just going to show you a special game where me and a buddy run riot in some smash and grab sort of game, which is definitely not a good indication of what you can do in a normal game in this ship, but it is an indication of why I love it so much. With a couple of final notes, I initially set out to play this ship with both consumable options and with both of the two main commanders, but honestly, the ship plays 98% like the Hipper if you want to use sonar, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. You'd still be making more credits, and you'd still be the prettiest gal at the ball, but I decided to test mostly with the reload booster since that is really what makes this different. Admittedly, it was a little scary at first, but if you have the confidence and the situational awareness to dodge torpedoes in other ships that maybe are a lot less maneuverable, then this really shouldn't be that much of a loss, except that you know that you're missing the hydro, or when you're trying to specifically ferret out some destroyer in a smokescreen. So as we move into commanders, you'll probably go about this one of three ways: von Mueller, Lutyens, or with the base commander, Scheer. My guess is that those are already probably in the order that people are likely to choose them in. Von Mueller and Lutyens both have almost exclusively good choices, depending on what consumable you're using, or for what threats you have angst. So I will try to hit on the mostly positive reasons why you would prefer one over the other, but they do both have a good combination of offensive and defensive capabilities. Von Mueller's chief advantage is that he has a slightly higher damage potential, whether that is with HE or AP, because he has access to two abilities that can improve fire chance, and he has punching through. He also has the potential for the longest range, which can come in handy sometimes, but if you're trying to play this routinely beyond its normal range, you're probably throwing away a lot of Prinz Eugen's potential. With Lutyens, you pick up a bit of survivability, and even better turret traverse. There is the possibility this means extra damage because you'll actually be able to get your guns on target quicker, but that's about all he would ever really add in terms of damage potential. Also, if you are looking to run this with sonar, he has several abilities that will help you improve that. Both of these gentlemen also have a selection of defensive abilities to help you soak a little bit more damage, if that's what you'd like, with Lutyens having a slight advantage in that department. Now, Scheer does pale in comparison on cruisers, unfortunately. You can cobble together some mildly useful skills, and actually he's the only one of these commanders who can increase the torpedo speed, which may be attractive. I guess the one really nice thing is, if you do decide to use Scheer, there are very few selections here that are really going to hurt you. They're just not as useful, maybe, as the other two commanders. So as for the stats, I will be using this build of the Gentleman of War himself, Karl von Mueller, who I think is probably the most likely commander you'll choose for either Prinz Eugen or Hipper. You can see the specific build I have on screen, but take note, this is not the setup I will be using for the replay that immediately follows this section. The survivability of Prinz Eugen is slightly greater than the Hipper. She comes in with just an extra 1,200 hit points, which means that the Prinz Eugen also ends up with a slightly better heal. And when I say that, I mean about 6 hit points per second. The extra 1,200 hit points is probably going to help you a little bit more than that extra 6 hit points, but it's still nice. The rest of this, the 13 to 160 millimeters of armor and 10% torpedo reduction, is exactly the same as what you'd find on the Hipper. In general, this armor scheme is fairly weak to HE, and you need to be very wary of ships with 16-inch guns, but your armor is sufficient to hold up to just about anything with 15-inch guns as long as you are appropriately angled. With 4x2 203mm guns, the range, reload, turret traverse, damage, and fire chance here are all exactly the same as what you can expect on the Hipper. As far as how the Hipper, and therefore Prinz Eugen, compare to the other Tier 7 ships in this regard, it is generally pretty low on the DPM, though you can get the range of this quite a bit above 15.8. Obviously, between the low DPM, the high AP penetration fall off at range, and of course the truly legendary German naval accuracy, I would probably not suggest leaning into buffing the range too much. As a note, you can also get this reload down a little with different inspiration choices or by using von Muller's refill station ability. but I would only suggest Refill Station if you're going to be using Hydroacoustic Search as a consumable. More on that in a bit. The largest functional difference between Prinz Eugen and Hipper are their torpedoes. Both ships are armed with a pair of triple torpedo launchers on each side. They have excellent angles, they have the same traverse speed, reload speed, and damage. Prinz Eugen's torpedoes are actually slightly less visible and come in with an additional 2 kilometers range, which can make a fairly big difference in how you can use them, but they are fairly slow at just 60 knots, which is 4 knots slower than the Hipper's torpedoes. Overall, this is probably a trade that favors Prinz Eugen, because the ranges where you're likely to be shooting torpedoes with the Hipper, you have a very good chance of hitting something, and that doesn't change much with the Prinz Eugen and the slightly slower torpedoes. But in Prinz Eugen, you do have the option of using torpedoes outside of knife fighting range, which is nice. The Prinz Eugen and Hipper both travel around at 33.9 knots with this particular build. This is increased a little bit by von Muller's base trait, and that pretty much means that you are the slowest Tier 7 cruiser that you're likely to face. The 770 meter turning radius is also the same between both ships, which is above average but not by a ton. And usually both ships are responsive enough to dodge a lot of torpedoes. Prinz Eugen's 8.7 second rudder shift is a tenth of a second higher than the Hipper. Now obviously that difference is small enough that you'd probably have to know it beforehand to notice, and even then I'm not really sure I'd believe you. All in all, the Prinz Eugen, like the Hipper, is a fairly large cruiser, so her sea detectability is higher than average among Tier 7 cruisers. Basically competitive with Charles Martel, but quite a bit less visible than any of the Russian cruisers. The Hipper actually does edge out Prinz Eugen in terms of its sea detectability. Granted, this is just by 100 meters. The detectability from air and while firing in smoke are exactly the same between the two German cruisers. In terms of consumables, these two ships are exactly the same, except that Prinz Eugen gets an extra 6 hit points per second from its heal, and it also has access to this reload booster consumable. Ordinarily, you only get one of these, so if you're thinking about using this, I can't stress enough how much better your life will be as a whole if you choose fully packed on whichever commander you decide to use. Unlike the Jean Bart, Prinz Eugen's turrets usually don't get knocked out all that often, and you do need all of your turrets operable, or at least not destroyed, in order to use this consumable, which might be an argument for using Lutyens as opposed to Karl von Mueller, because he has access to Sponge. Now at long last, we are going to jump into some gameplay. We're going to be on Shards. Here you can see immediately what I do in the Prinz Eugen is check who's in the game. You can see on my team, I've got JC with me. Always a good time. He's a buddy I division with quite a bit. And the other thing I'm looking for there is, are there any ships in the game with 16-inch guns? If there are, I have to play a little bit differently. They are more dangerous than 15-inch guns by more than an inch, and I just have to take that into account. There are two. The two are the Sinop and the Iowa. Now, as you can see, we're starting out here, trying to pick on that Edinburgh. Most people don't like to start in the middle on Shards. German ships, I often don't mind it because it pretty much gets you stuck into the action immediately. And here you can see, this Edinburgh doesn't really want to be here. I'm going to make sure that I get him. I activate immediately that reload booster, and before he gets into smoke, I want to make sure that I finish him off. Several nice hits there, and we managed to start the game off right with a kill. Now you can see we also have this game from JC's point of view. And what JC is doing is moving up after me, and I am unfortunately drawing all of the attention, which usually has a deleterious effect on my survivability. But the two of us in support of one another, you can see he's firing HE there. Lays out a nice spread of torpedoes. He's got plenty of range with these 8-kilometer torpedoes. And then, of course, even though the Sinop is one of those two ships we don't really want to fight, you can see if we get him in the right place, you can do a lot of damage to him. I cut back to me real quick because what you just saw there is I asked JC, hey, what's the Synop looking at? And he said at the time it was looking at him. And I think that's probably true. So I popped out around the side to see if I could help finish him off quickly. He put a good 10,000 damage into me, but really, that just shows you one of the things you want to do when you're really, really close to these dangerous battleships, which is flatten out as much as you can so that the shells go straight through you, because you're not particularly well armored in total. That Jean Bar seems to know exactly what I was trying to do. You see, he waits with this shot. He doesn't put it into my front bow because I will bounce it. I think I managed to get just too close. His guns don't probably have any gun depression, so by this point there's really nothing he can do. The shells go straight through me. Managed to get around the side. We fire one set of torpedoes to test if we're outside of the arming distance, which is usually 300 meters, and put the second set in right behind that. Finish him off with some AP. Now we will switch over to JC. You can see his commander up on the screen. At this point, he's going to break off towards the north. Going to go south. As for me, I'm using a very different commander. I'll go ahead and put him up on the screen. Usually I like to do that a little bit earlier in the video, but man, did this start out real fast with a ton of damage. You can see I am using Lucians here. And in spite of our low hit point situation, we've managed to recover some of it thanks to the heal. We have a couple extra heals left because obviously I'm running with fully packed. That is to get access to a third heal as well as that second reload consumable. I'm shooting HE at this distance because, for one, I had it loaded up at the time. I set the turpits on fire there. He immediately Damaconed it, so I was trying to get a fire again. As you can see, JC here is advancing on the other side of the map. He has picked the side of the map that has the more dangerous target remaining, which is the Iowa. Now the Iowa, 16-inch guns, can punch straight through this ship at pretty much any angle. The closer you are to it, strangely, the safer you are in some ways, because those shells will potentially fly straight through you. But you can see, obviously, JC's backing off here just a little bit so he doesn't draw too much attention. He's going to wait until the battle's a little bit more to his advantage. On the other side of the map, I am dealing with 2 of the 3 remaining destroyers. Now, in this particular case, we have essentially one of the disadvantages of Prinz Eugen, and that is usually right about now you would pop your hydroacoustic. Not only is it going to alert you a little bit quicker if there are any torpedoes in the water, but also at this range I might actually be able to spot that destroyer in smoke. As it turns out, he's just a little bit too far away. He pops up for a second there. We get a nice blind fire off, finish him off. And here you can see, back on the other side of the map, JC is still trying to maintain some position here on the enemy team. Those torpedoes give him a little bit of area denial ability that maybe the Hipper doesn't have because of the reduced range. But we're going to jump back over because there's still things going on the south side of the map. We've still got a Tirpitz out here, and we've still got this Z-23. Now, Tirpitz gets taken out. My reload booster has recharged, and as you see, I'm just rounding this corner, making sure I can get my guns in line. As soon as I fire the shot, we hit the reload booster. It cuts down that reload a lot. We managed to get the second shot out before the reload booster ends. We'd actually be able to get 1 or 2 more shots after that and finish off that destroyer. Now JC's showing what these guns can really do. This is one of the things that people commonly forget about the Hipper and obviously the Prinz Eugen. Maybe they just don't know about it. It does a lot of damage with AP up close. And again, you saw there, that Iowa put a big hit in on JC in terms of scored a lot of hits, but because he was so close and because he was presenting so much of a broadside, the shells passed right through him and did only over penetrating damage. That's really good in terms of gameplay because he's keeping his ship as alive as he possibly can. Now again, this is a situation where it would be really, really nice to have Hydro. As it turns out, if he did, he would have been able to notice those torpedoes sooner, but also the Atago behind him. This is not so good. And though the Hipper does have excellent turret traverse, and so does Prinz Eugen, he is not able to get those turrets all the way around. He does take a torpedo off the back of his ship. Thankfully, all of those shots land in the rocks. And almost as soon as this Jervis is spotted, you can see he's heading for the hills. But he takes a little bit of HE along the way. Now you can guess that JC is trying to figure how he's going to work out this engagement. He's got a lot of stuff going on here, all of which is extremely dangerous to him. That Atago does look like he's pursuing. We see him put some torpedoes out there. He leads a little bit more, probably because these are a little slower and that guy's accelerating. He's not going to need those torpedoes, though, with that kind of damage. Just oof. If you didn't catch that, that was like 26,000 damage. Hits the reload booster, and obviously the next shot takes him out. If you think I'm leaving him out to dry here, I'm not. I'm moving as fast as I can. But again, you see JC using those torpedoes as area denial in case the Jervis is thinking about popping out on that side. He's not. Honestly, probably would have been a better choice for him. The sort of weak HE that the Hipper and Prinz Eugen have, not super great at dealing with these destroyers, but there's not much left of that guy. One last good salvo, and he finishes him off. Now, in this case, both of us had extremely good games here. You can see JC just killing it with 121,000 damage. Thank you for sending this to me, JC. It was a great, fun game for us to play. If you want to check out JC's channel, I have left a link down in the description for it. On the other side, I was also having a really, really good game. Again, not indicative of what you can normally expect from Prinz Eugen, but it is a reason why I love this ship. When you can get in there and melee and brawl, that stuff is really fun. These sorts of games are a lot more memorable for me than sailing around in the back, shooting HE at stuff. Obviously not for everybody. There's a lot to really kind of master in order to play the Hipper well, when to give yourself up, when not to. There you can see just the absurd result. Both of us scoring really, really well. And I'm going to go ahead and throw in a little bit of information on the credit situation after that kind of game. Hope you guys have found this review to be useful. Hope you enjoyed the gameplay, and I'll see you on the next one.